Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is a stream that I've been waiting for, even though it's not happening quite the same way I expected it to. Because Tim Cook, not too long ago, in fact, yesterday, said that this week we should expect something that is in the air. So everyone initially expected the M4 MacBook Air. I've played around on Twitter. I predicted that today we would be getting Air tags. Tomorrow we would be getting a new iPad Air, and then afterwards we would be getting an M4 MacBook Air on Thursday. Well, one of my predictions is not time-wise correct, but it's correct nevertheless, and that is we are getting a new iPad Air. In fact, we are not just getting a new iPad Air, we are also getting a new base level iPad, now featuring an A16 processor. We are also getting a new Magic Keyboard to go along with that iPad Air, though that one is not quite exactly what I expected. And I'm pretty sure we should be still getting an M4 MacBook Air this week, because it would be quite a weak announcement, in my opinion, to like tease this iPad Air and then launch it just alongside also the cheap iPad, which has its own appeal, in my opinion, and then like not have anything else for the week, right? Be done with the week on Tuesday. That's not the way Apple has operated recently. So let's hope that we'll actually get the M4 MacBook Air maybe tomorrow. And who knows, maybe Apple will have some surprise Mac Studio announcement by the end of the week, though I doubt that. That has not been rumored thus far by anyone, not by Mark Gurman, not by Min-Chi Kuo. So let's stick for now with the iPads. Already see people joining the chat. Hi Relay, hi Jan. You're saying the A16 for the base level iPad is a very like subdued release and it's not getting Apple Intelligence, which is funny. I see like the constant clash of people like, oh, you know what? I don't care about Apple Intelligence at all. And then a product comes out that doesn't run Apple Intelligence, and I see people like, it doesn't even run Apple Intelligence. And I'm like, what can I do to satisfy you? But no, the iPad, the base level iPad, the 11th gen iPad, whatever you're gonna call it, the main appeal for it is not even, in my opinion, the A16 processor. To me, and you can even see that in Apple's announcement on their newsroom page, is it's double the base storage. It now comes standard with 128 gigabytes of storage at $349. That also means the 256 gigabyte version is actually $50 cheaper than it was before. And might I remind you guys, all of this is happening while we get the highest tariffs ever. Like, I mean, not ever, but like in modern history. But Trump just put 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, which is absolute insanity. But again, this is not a political podcast. But they also doubled the tariffs on China from 10% to 20%. And all of these products, unless Apple can get Trump to like cut them off from the tariffs and make exceptions for them, which at that point will make it doubtful, will China like tariff them in some special way or whatever? At that point, like the fact that we get any price reductions or any better value right now is absolute insanity. iPad 10 A14 and iPad 10 A16. Well, it's iPad 11th generation. Wait, do they call it iPad 10? Did I miss that? iPad 10th. That might be something I have missed. By the way, guys, while I do my research, while we go through all of this stuff together, shout out for you to do all the YouTube jazz, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You guys see I love interacting with a lively live chat. Also, feel free to donate. Any super chat or super sticker goes a long way to help me make more of these videos and reinvest right back into the channel. You can also become a supporter right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, and Max Maximus are all MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And you can also choose to become a supporter over on Patreon. So, what do they call this? There should be a comparison page, and the comparison page should give it. No, they just call it iPad, which to me just makes sense at this point. And when I look at previous iPads, yeah, they used to call it iPad 10th gen. Now they call it just according to the processor that's inside. And you can also call it like iPad early 2025 if you choose to. Yeah, but this iPad is really for people like it's like for kids and stuff like that, and for elderly people, it's not really gonna like appeal to them as an AI focused product. Plus, Apple hasn't fixed everything that, in my opinion, was wrong once with this iPad. As far as I know, it still doesn't support. Yeah, it still doesn't support the Apple Pencil Pro, right? So I think that we're getting an Apple Intelligence enabled base level iPad by the time Apple goes in, redesigns a few components. At that point, it will probably get like a bint A18 chip. Let me look actually here. So Wi-Fi 6, that makes sense. Landscape 12 megapixel center stage camera. Okay, so that makes sense. Apple sees that as a crucial feature on iPads. And when we look at more, it has a 5-core CPU and a 4-core GPU. So it's actually a pretty heavily bint A16 chip. I assume it has like one E-core disabled and one GPU core. So yeah, there is a reason why Apple does what they are doing here, right? Look at the M3, 8-core CPU, 9-core GPU, pretty heavily bint chip. So yeah, Apple definitely is trying to leverage like their silicon supply as much as they can by using bin chips, by using older chips, by using older bin chips on their very cheapest products. But they are trying to also give you some stuff back, especially if you're somebody who might not be the most hardcore user. They're like, you know what? We know a lot of you really care about that base level price, but a lot of you really don't like that it started with 64 gigabytes. Now for $349, it's 128 gigabytes. For $449, it's 256. And you can get Wi-Fi plus cellular with 128 gigabytes now below $500, which again, it's not gonna like wow anyone who is like potentially in the market for an M4 iPad Pro, right? And you care about stuff like the great tandem OLED screen and like the fastest processor you can get. But it's something that is gonna appeal to like this is now something I would easily buy for like my nephew, who's like 4 years old, as like the base entry model. He already has the base entry model from the previous generation that came like with a gas contract or whatever. But like overall, if I was going to buy something new at MSRP, this would be the first iPad in a while where I say, you know what, it's not so expensive that it would be like a shame to give it to a kid, nor is it a bad enough value in terms of like storage so that I would constantly have to go to the iPad, like because my kid is like complaining, oh my god, it cannot run Roblox or something like that. Oh my god, I cannot install my games because I don't have enough storage. And if you're, for example, buy this for yourself and you buy like the 256 gig version, now it's way more quote unquote future proof. One thing I'm not sure about is if the A16 inside the base level iPad actually has 6 gigs of memory. I hope it does. Wouldn't be surprised if maybe Apple cheaped out it and still has only 4 gigabytes, but I really hope they're moving like the baseline for the iPad. Otherwise, this will not be a very long supported iPad. By the way, guys, cheers. So, but let's actually analyze everything that Apple has announced today. We usually don't start with the cheaper products, but hey, today we did, which has its own advantages. But obviously, the star of today's announcement is the M3 iPad Air and the new Magic Keyboard that it comes along with. The new Magic Keyboard actually being cheaper than before, which is quite nice. Jan, you're saying the specs from iPad Air M2 are the same to the iPad M3. Yeah, it's just a chip swap. Like there's nothing crazy here. Let me again. Um, I know I'm getting distracted a little bit, guys, but like iPad Air. Let me look at the tech specs. Don't forget that we just got a new iPad Air like 8-9 months ago, so it makes sense that a lot of the specs would be basically reused. Yeah, I see that Apple didn't even change like the peak brightness for the 11-inch version. Like one thing that stood out when Apple introduced the 13-inch iPad Air was that it featured a brighter screen, though all the other specs are quite the same: 264 ppi, p3 color gamut support, true tone. um, but yeah, for some reason it was brighter. So if this was actually any change here, except for like a chip swap, then I'm pretty sure they would at least have given us equivalent brightness levels across the two iPads. Yeah, that basically means if you really are not spending on the M4 iPad Pro and some of your use cases involve a lot of usage outside, you might have to spring for the 13-inch, but then again, you could also buy a refurbished older 13-inch model. You can also buy like an older M1 or M2 iPad Pro, which obviously feature mini LED screens. So yeah, plenty of choice, definitely. So let's see how Apple is advertising it here. Apple today introduced a faster, more powerful iPad Air with the M3 chip and built for Apple Intelligence, which is funny because obviously Apple Intelligence was introduced in the middle of last year. And then the A18 iPhone, right, with its second generation 3 nanometer parts, was the first device like built for Apple Intelligence. But then on Apple Silicon, which is the M series chips, every one of those chips, partially because they have a lot more cores, a lot more bandwidth, and of course more memory, all of them support Apple Intelligence. So the move from M2 to M3 does not make this device suddenly built more for Apple Intelligence. That being said, M3 does handle AI better than M2 and especially M1. So if your focus is in any way AI, well, probably look at something like the M4 devices. But if you're willing to go with a little bit less, you can now look at this iPad. Yeah, oh yeah, man. For you, the M2 13-inch iPad Air is plenty fine. Like, this is not a device for you to upgrade from the last gen to this gen. This is like, at best, it's for you to upgrade from like the A14 iPad Air, right? The A14 being in lockstep generationally with the M1, but the M1 obviously being more powerful. And like even then, I would argue it's more a product to upgrade from something like the A12 iPads, right? So like an A12X or A12Z iPad Pro even, or something like that. That is if you can live without promotion at that point, which you probably shouldn't, in my opinion. This is also something that definitely is overdue to come to the cheaper iPads, like some kind of higher refresh. And given that LTPO for Apple has actually been something they've been working with since the 2017 iPad Pro on LCD panels, I'm just a little bit shocked that we still don't have it on anything that isn't like a mini LED screen or an OLED screen, right? And technically like a tandem OLED screen above all of that. So standard screens are still across the board, 5 to 600 nits of brightness, 60 hertz, P3 color gamut, barely, like they don't fully take advantage of it the way that like your tandem OLED iPad Pro will do. So definitely if you're going for the highest quality screen you can get on iPad, it's not this device. If you're looking at something with a great screen at this price range, you should look at like a refurbished M1 or M2 iPad Pro, or simply a discounted model. So, taking its incredible combination of power efficient performance and portability. So, this is one thing. Like the M3, some people call it a stopgap between M2 and M4. Some people say that N3B from TSMC is just a bad note in general. They said Apple just wants to move away from it as fast as possible, move over to N3B. They don't want to support the M3 architecture and stuff like that. And since then, we are now getting the A17 iPad mini and now the M3 iPad Air. Like, I could argue maybe Apple just has enough M3 supplies from the M3 MacBooks, especially when it comes to binned chips. This is probably something that they've been building up in terms of supply ever since they started getting M3 processors from TSMC. But apparently Apple doesn't hate those chips enough to not use them. So whenever you see the likes of Max Tech or even Min-Chi Kuo or Mark Gurman make big statements about like, oh, Apple doesn't like this or Apple doesn't want to do this, always take a deep breath. Probably should be doing that too. Slow down a little and ask yourself, are there still economic benefits or just like logistical benefits for Apple to reuse something even though it might not have been the best tech ever? For M3, the way that this chip is binned in both CPU and GPU, that to me strongly. Wait, by the way, is it a CPU bin chip? No, the M3 featuring a more powerful 8-core CPU. So no, it's not CPU binned. I'm sorry. It's a 9-core GPU out of 10. But the M3 never had 10-core versions, right? It's only the M4 that introduced a combination of 4 performance plus 6 efficiency cores. I got actually confused a little bit. Okay, so it's not as heavily binned. And when it comes to the A16, this is where we got the CPU binning, right? Because we got like 5 CPU cores rather than the 6 that it should have. 2 performance cores and 4 efficiency, right? And here we're getting 3 efficiency cores. That probably won't affect you too much. The main performing is coming from the performance cores. 1 GPU core less. This definitely, like, it will not kill you, but it's definitely not the greatest considering that we have moved on in terms of architecture, in terms of bandwidth, in terms of amount of GPU cores. So this thing will not give you the best graphics performance. But granted, this is a $350 iPad. And also one thing that, as I've pointed out before, Apple does not advertise the amount of memory that they're using on the A16 processor. I hope it's 6 gigabytes. I know for a fact it's not 8. I think if Apple went to 8 gigabytes, they would have just used a heavily binned A17 chip the way they did on the iPad mini, because it just wouldn't make sense otherwise. But I really hope it's not 4 gigabytes because that would be a little bit too limiting. Some people might buy it for school or for college. You would just want to run like your 2 apps side by side. This still doesn't support stuff like Stage Manager, but it should be better at handling multitasking, in my opinion, than like the immediate predecessor. But obviously, if you want the best of the best, that's when you get for the when you go for the M4 iPad Pro. M3 is up to 35% faster for multi-threaded CPU performance than iPad Air with M1. Okay. M3 features 9-core GPU, 40% faster graphics performance than M1. Of course, it comes with hardware-accelerated mesh shading, ray tracing, and dynamic caching. I've recently seen some people show some really great results that you get by highly optimizing for dynamic caching. Like, dynamic caching is already like automatic, right, on an API level with Metal. But apparently, if you really build like your AI tools and your games around it, you get like a crazy amount almost of extra memory through it. So not sure if it's happening, if it's really something common in the developer community, but it's still cool. And yeah, for stuff like rendering, it's 4 times faster than M1. This is something that Apple has claimed time and time again, where, for example, like non-ray trace devices, like they might get like 30-40% faster in raster, but then at the same time get an over doubling per raster in ray tracing. So if you have like a 40% more graphics performance in raster, you can basically multiply that times 2.2 or something like that, and wait, no, times 4, so it would be actually like 2.5 times faster in terms of ray tracing per raster performance, and now you get a really nice rendering machine, which this is something that I've seen some people downplay, like Apple's hardware support for hardware accelerated ray tracing, because of stuff like Solar Bay and how it compares versus Qualcomm, for example. But then I've seen like ray tracing tests between like M2, even M3, M4 Max, and then the Snapdragon X Elite, and most importantly, the latest AMD system on a chip processors for Windows. And the fact that Apple is ahead of architectures that support hardware accelerated ray tracing, because AMD has supported hardware accelerated ray tracing for a while, but with like the M2 chip, that's like crazy. That means that whatever Apple is doing with like the cache systems and on M2 and stuff like that, like on a per raster basis, Apple's ray tracing, even in software, has been good ever since the M1, and it's been really great ever since the M3. And this is still Apple only now figuring out ray tracing, because Apple is not running out to optimize for ray tracing in games, for example, because most games coming to Mac are only now are getting some ray tracing support, stuff like Cyberpunk and Assassin's Creed Shadows, for example. But overall, like what are you really doing on macOS that needs ray tracing beyond like Blender renders, right? So the fact that Apple is already this good when it comes to ray tracing, despite running systems that don't really need it that much, to me is pretty cool. So faster neural engine, blah blah blah. We have already talked obviously about the M3 chip on this side. It's not a monumental uplift over M2, but it's still nice to have. And there's a reason why they're comparing it here versus M1, which actually, like, just comparing it here, iPad Air, 5th generation. So they're absolutely like, for a second, I even was like, wasn't there like an iPad Air with an M2? Of course there was. But yeah, like Apple clearly wants you to compare it more to like the M1 iPad Air, right? So, always make sure that when you look at those comparisons make sense for you. Like Jan, for example, our viewer just said he has the M2 iPad Air, right? The 13-inch version. That makes absolutely no reason to upgrade. Like if anything you do requires enough like hardware accelerated ray tracing and stuff like that for you to warrant an upgrade, at that point you should go for M4, which is even faster across the board, or even more importantly, go to the max, to the max, I guess, to a MacBook, right, or even like a Mac Mini, a Mac Studio, because that will satisfy your needs way better than a slightly better iPad Air. Other improvements over iPad models with A-series chips include support for Apple Intelligence. Oh my God, I cannot say the S word anymore. Jesus Christ. My iPad just activated it. Wait, did I even say S and the name of Apple's home, of Apple's voice assistant? Or did my iPad just activate Apple Intelligence for no reason whatsoever? Okay, it doesn't seem to be triggering right now. So whatever I have said triggered it, but it's not triggered anymore. The choice of 11 and 13-inch sizes, right? The 13-inch size was only introduced with the previous M2 iPad Air. Support for advanced accessories, including the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil Pro. So there's a lot of AI talk. I've said that in like my analysis of the iPhone 16e announcement. It makes zero sense for me to just like rattle down all the Apple Intelligence stuff. Obviously, you guys know iOS 18.4 is now hitting betas, so there is more Apple Intelligence stuff for you to experience, especially if you previously weren't privy to it at all, right? If you were not in an English-speaking country, if you were not, if you were in the EU and stuff like that, so that is getting fixed. Now, I know some people will still talk about Apple Intelligence, not as good as Google Gemini or ChatGPT. Well, at that point, if you really don't care at all and you're willing to vote with your wallet, you can buy the new A16 iPad, which doesn't feature Apple Intelligence at all. But otherwise, features like cleanup and shit like that to me has been very, very helpful. And if you are Genmoji has been my favorite AI feature that I've thus far used, and I use it daily at this point. So yeah, I don't think that Apple Intelligence is as great as it could be, but neither do I really care because I don't really use most of the AI stuff that other people are offering either. Blah, 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 more Apple Intelligence, ChatGPT integration. Let's talk about something that is actually, I think, much more interesting to you guys, and that is actually a new piece of hardware and a new piece of hardware at a new price. And that is a new Magic Keyboard for the iPad Air. So if you have watched this channel before, you know that I have predicted that Apple would make basically the same Magic Keyboard for the iPad Air as they have done for the iPad Pro, maybe find some way to make it even the exact same model and just have something that compensates for the 1 millimeter of different thickness. But alas, that's not what they did. This, in fact, is a fully separate iPad Air optimized upgrade that is cheaper, $30 cheaper than the previous generation. And those $30 cheaper compromises actually make a lot of sense. Alniro Farezel Vibovo, how many hertz the new iPad Air M3? It still has a 60 hertz screen. I still think worth to buy iPad Air M2 because of the price and the age. Yeah, if you can get a discounted iPad Air M2 and it has like a substantial price discount over this, I don't disagree at all. I think that just like you get like 1 year of less software support, you still get Apple Intelligence. Like, yeah, you might not get like ray traced games in the future, but with the amount of different performance or the lack of difference in performance between M2 and M3, you really don't want to overspend right now for M3 rather than just wait until like maybe spend a little less right now so you can upgrade quicker in the future. And you ask about how many hertz. If you are somebody who cares about that, at that point I would argue a discounted older or even a refurbished M2 iPad Pro will make far more sense to you, because you still get most of the performance here. The device will actually feel smoother in real life. You get a nicer screen, not just from the ProMotion, but also from the mini LED stuff. And you get like, what are you really missing here? Like the camera here, the center stage camera that is now in the correct position. Like I would argue most people can live with a camera on this side, especially if it means just getting a nicer day-to-day experience, in my opinion. So the new Magic Keyboard at $269 for the 11-inch model, $319 for the 13-inch model. That's of course compares to $299 before that and $349 before that. In fact, those are still the prices for the Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro. So at least percentage-wise, now the Magic Keyboard is not quite as big of an ask for the iPad Air as it was before. I wish Apple had gone just the full $50 and made this $249 and $299. But again, do I need to remind you that they will nickel and dime you wherever they can, especially with stuff like storage and RAM, 5G upgrades. I don't see any of that getting cheaper at this point. The fact that we are getting an iPad with double the base storage right now, with a 2-generation newer chip at the same price after a huge price reduction, because don't forget previously like the base iPad used to be $449. That to me is already surprising given having that now Apple has to work around like 20% tariffs from Chinese imports. The new one got the promotion. No, promotion on iPads is still entirely meant for pro iPads. Like, in fact, I don't think we have gotten promotion beyond pro devices yet at all. I mean, sure, you can connect the MacBook Air to like a high refresh external monitor, but that's not the same. The iPhone 17 and 17 Air will be the first non-pro Apple devices to actually feature ProMotion. On iPads, right now, it's just an iPad Pro feature. On MacBooks, it's just a MacBook Pro and above feature. So yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, but it's something you this is where like older, discounted, and refurbished products really come into play. This is where I recommend like an M2 iPad Pro over an M3 iPad Air to many people. So this Magic Keyboard, it gets a function row, right? So that's something that we've already gotten on the Magic Keyboard for the M4 iPad Pro. It also has a larger built-in trackpad, which still doesn't look huge, of course, if you're somebody who comes from like a MacBook, but it is definitely nice. So it does have improvements, I should say, like literally. But for example, if you compare it versus the M4 iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard, right? So what do you lose? Here in this case, you lose out on Jesus Christ, Apple, please show me. Um, it doesn't offer a haptic feedback for the trackpad, and it also lacks the aluminum palm rest next to the trackpad. So, and it does make sense, right? Haptic feedback is more expensive than a traditional diving board mechanism trackpad. Making the device out of more aluminum is more expensive. It's also going to make it heavier for no reason. So to me, this absolutely makes sense to cut down the cost there, but at least the keyboard itself is still nice. Like one of my pet peeves about like the not the Magic Keyboard, whatever they call it, for like the base level iPad, is that if for an over $200 accessory, they don't feature like backlit keys. Obviously, at this price point, you do get backlit keys, but it's still like a little bit ridiculous. And hey, this one is actually compatible with previous generation iPad Airs, including 4th, 5th generation, the M2 generation, and of course, just look out that you get the right size. So, price reduction, new features, definitely still not the greatest value when it comes to external keyboards, and definitely a big percentage of your iPad Air's actual price. But in my opinion, this makes it far more likely for somebody to now get an iPad Air and also get a Magic Keyboard at like MSRP, right from Apple. Because everyone that I've seen like purchase iPad Airs thus far is they've been like, oh, I'll go to like Amazon and look for like a discounted Magic Keyboard or something like that, right? Because those original prices were really hard to stomach, and you could often get those keyboards for like $249, maybe even $230 or something like that. Now you actually get a better keyboard for a little bit less money. So while I wish this was $249 and $299, it's still, in my opinion, a better situation than it was last generation. So that's something to keep an eye on. If you still want the best value, you probably can look into like previous generation stuff too. So obviously we've discussed this already. And now comes in white. That's one thing that I'm actually curious about. It does not come only in white, does it? Because that would be a little weird. So I assume that's the M4 keyboard. So Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro, $299 and $349 respectively for the 13-inch version. Magic Keyboard for iPad Air. Oh no, this one is only available in white? Oh, Apple is going the AirPods route. Honestly, if they were to stick with one color for like a device that you touch daily with like your greasy hands, they probably should have just gone black, in my opinion. And yeah, the Magic Keyboard Folio, that one, please, if you are interested in this, because it's not a bad product by itself, don't buy it anywhere close at MSRP, right? For one, 249 is just $100 less expensive than the entry level iPad now with an A16 chip, right? You don't get a backlit keyboard here. Like at least like, you get like a function row and actually a decently sized trackpad, and you get like a good diving board mechanism. Yes, of course it's not haptic, but it is cheaper. But yeah, this is the one product where I'm like, the MSRP here makes no sense. At 199 it would still be expensive. In my opinion, it should be more like 169 at best. Without backlit keys, honestly, it should be 149 in my opinion. But at least if this was 199, right, and this one was 249 and this one was 299, those would still be like premium priced things, but in my opinion, just ever so slightly less nickel and dimey than they feel right now. Is Apple moving towards early releases for more devices? I think they do. And the reason why is because every new product, every new refresh is a new opportunity to restart marketing, right? We're not talking about like crazy big marketing campaigns. This new iPad Air will not like get posters everywhere, like a big redesign or something like that, or the way that like the iPad Pro got for its tandem OLED screen, or the way everything got about Apple Intelligence. But every new product is an opportunity to reevaluate, how do I market this? Does it need maybe like a little bit more storage, right? Because think about the base level iPad. I mean, Apple could have like doubled its storage mid-generation. Nothing would have prevented them from doing so. But instead, because this would have created very little opportunity to market it, they actually gave it a newer chip. Sure, it's not an Apple Intelligence chip, but if you want Apple Intelligence, get iPad Mini Air or above, right? So Apple can still upsell you the way they can upsell you an iPhone with more cameras and ProMotion and brighter screens and stuff like that, and the dynamic island versus the notch. So I think that every new product gives also an opportunity to fix older issues. Like, I still maintain that unfortunately the base level iPad does have shortcomings, especially without its support for the Apple Pencil Pro. It still is reliant on either like a weird cable workaround with the original iPad Pencil, right? The one going back to the 2015 iPad Pro announcement, my first Pro iPad with an A9X chip and stuff like that. Or it supports the Apple Pencil with USB-C, which does not charge or automatically connect to your product. Instead, it just magnetically attaches to it, right? The way that Apple originally built the camera mechanism here, it did not leave them space for like a proper Apple Pencil attachment mechanism. So they really dumped it down in that regard. And then only by the time they like redesigned the iPad Air M2 and then of course M4 iPad Pro and stuff like that, this is when they had when they offered you like the front facing camera. Well, all selfie cameras are front facing, but like in the right spot, right? A lot of people said the camera here is just in the wrong spot for an iPad. Apple needs to put it over here. They did. And on those more expensive products, they also fixed like the Apple Pencil attachment. And I think that by the time they also redesign the cheap iPad, right, they will also use that opportunity, in my opinion, to give it like support for the Apple Pencil Pro. They might redesign it enough so it features a new Magic Keyboard Folio or something like that, right? But right now that they don't have anything big in the meantime, they're like, you know what? We have enough A16 chips. In fact, we can use A16 chips that are now manufactured inside the US to potentially go to like Trump and tell him, you know what? We are producing more and more stuff in the US. If you make shit way too expensive for us, we might actually have to become more reliant on countries like India in the meantime. So please get rid of the tariffs, and in the meantime, we'll just promise to work on like making more and more stuff in the United States. So, but please don't kill our profit margins in the meantime. So again, there are a lot of thoughts going into, but yes, really, I do think that Apple is going, if maybe not for more exactly annual upgrades, at least for more regular updates, right? Because sometimes even an 18-month cycle wouldn't be that much different from like an annual cycle, in my opinion. But sometimes an 18-month cycle for Apple was like a weird combination of like 12-month cycle followed by 24-month cycle. And then, of course, when you look at like the older Mac minis and stuff like that, you had products that weren't upgraded sometimes for 3 or 4 years. I think now with the control over Apple Silicon, Apple just wants to move entirely away from that, have more opportunities to market products, have more opportunity to fix smaller issues. And I do believe that this is actually a pretty good attempt at that. But let's continue with what they're advertising here. So, of course, comes in white it's an interesting way to say it comes only in white. So but yeah, definitely not the worst thing if you are definitely a fan of the Magic Keyboard and like its free like hovering mechanism and stuff like that. Then it's pretty cool and pretty much a no-brainer in my opinion. Yes, should be still a little bit cheaper, but you get an extra USB-C port for charging and stuff like that. You still get the really nice build quality of the Magic Keyboard, and it's still a pretty unique accessory in that regard, right? So many accessories, even like my Logitech keyboard here that is much more similar to like the keyboard folio that we've discussed for the base level iPad, right? It forces you to like put a case on your device before you attach a keyboard and stuff like that. Here, it's just like a very beautiful, very free design in a way. And in my opinion, if it weren't as expensive, I think it would just be the absolute default accessory for anyone owning an iPad. If this was like even $200, then people would just be getting it left and right, in my opinion. But at that point, it would just sort of have dramatically lower profit margins, so Apple would be way less interested in selling you that at this price. Guys, I've seen more people joining. That's very, very great to hear. As always, please, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, comment. You guys see, I love interacting with a lively comment section. You can also send a super chat or a super sticker. Then I'm guaranteed to read out your comment. And of course, all support is very much appreciated. Speaking of support, you can become a YouTube supporter here or a supporter over on Patreon. However you want to interact with me, with the community, it's all very much welcome and appreciated. Why is the chip less bin than the base M3 MacBook Air? What is the binning on that chip actually? MacBook Air. I'm sorry, guys. I have so much stuff at work recently that I honestly like some of my Apple knowledge is just getting replaced by like more medicine and more dermatology. So I'm just really, really like, so M3. Wait, do they not? Chip here, Apple M3 chip, 4 performance cores, 4 efficiency. Oh, you mean it has 1 fewer GPU cores? Wait, that's the M2, that's the M3. I assume that's because they just had cores with 9 GPU cores, right? They just had more M3 chips with 9 GPU cores. Because as much as we criticized M3B for being like a bad in-between node, right? Not quite 3 nanometer, but as expensive as 3 nanometer, in many ways barely a big upgrade over 4 nanometer, especially over a refined 4 nanometer like N4P, right? So by the time M3 originally came out, maybe it was more necessary to bin down more chips to 8 GPU cores. Plus, it's a way to upsell people on on a device with more storage, or even just upgrade the chip by itself, which is not something that people will do on the iPad Air, right? So yeah, and I assume also, by the way, I think that, and this is a prediction for tomorrow. You can take it or leave it, and you can shove it in my face tomorrow if it's not true. I think that the if we are either getting the M3 iPad MacBook Air removed, so we would get a MacBook Air lineup that consists of the M2 chip and the M4 chip, right? Because don't forget, M2 is built on 5 nanometer. There is way more 5 nanometer supply than N3B supply. Or Apple might actually play around with the M3 and give us like the 9-core GPU version or something like that, or whatever helps them with binning right now, but like also get fully rid of like the 10-core GPU version. Again, this is entirely me predicting shit. I have obviously no insider sources, but by the time the M4 MacBook Air comes out, they will have to change around this lineup somehow. So that will definitely be interesting, though. But yeah, this is my theory on why the M3 on the iPad Air is binned differently than the M3 is binned on the MacBook Air. And that is simply because the MacBook Air came out significantly earlier, of course, than the M3 iPad Air. In fact, it came out basically exactly a year ago. That's why we are currently awaiting the M4 MacBook Air right around the corner. And speaking of somewhat weirdly bent parts, the iPad, the base level iPad, what previously we knew as the 10th generation iPad, is getting updated to the A16 processor and double the storage, which means moving from 64 gigabytes to 128. And that also makes the 256 gigabyte version $50 less expensive than before. So $349, $449. And if you're crazy, you can go for a $649 base level iPad with 512 gigabytes of storage. I have no idea why these configurations exist. I have no idea why the iPhone 16e exists in a 512 gigabyte configuration that costs 900 USD. And I have no idea why there's a base level iPad with 512 gigabytes of storage that costs almost double that of the base iPad. So, but at last it exists. I can definitely recommend you get the 128 gigabytes of storage, especially if you get it for like a kid, or maybe for like your grandparent or something like that, or like an elderly mother or father. And if you're really buying it maybe more for like yourself, for school, for university, then 256 gigabyte can make sense. Though these devices also very often get like at least small discounts through sites like Amazon, so keep out your eye on for that. If Apple gives us the M2 with 16 gigabytes for cheap, that will be great. Oh, you mean like if they reduce prices even further? Like, what's the current price of the base M2? It's $999. I guess, yeah, I mean, that could be something, right? Maybe they drop the price to $899 on this one, which would actually make it one of the cheaper iPad Macs to get into in recent history, right? Especially if you consider stuff like inflation and do I have to get out the tariff articles again, right? But I do also assume that the M2 MacBooks probably won't be hit by tariffs in the United States because Apple probably has enough inventory inside the United States to meet demand. At least that's what I assume. They could also start shipping like European MacBooks to the United States and then ship Chinese supply over to Europe. I know it's not very legal, but it's still possible technically if they have already built up inventory inside of Europe. But that's a very different discussion. We'll have to see if there will be any price changes down the road. But definitely, one thing I can promise you, don't expect Apple to suddenly become super generous on RAM and storage. Like I know some people said, like I myself said, 16 gigabytes with the M4 generation, M5 probably doubles like the storage, right? because M5 will most likely not be a huge deal over M4. Um, 512 gigs of storage versus 256 doesn't really change the production cost almost at all for Apple, right? But now I predict that we'll see 256 gigabytes of base storage for quite a long time, at least on these like cheaper options. But yeah, I could see that happening. Like M2 at 899, M4 at 1099. I think that could work. M2 M2 bint, right? 8 GPU cores, and M4 bint 2 then, at least on the 13-inch version, and then fully enabled on the 15-inch version. Yeah, that could work out, but again, Apple will have to decide how that vibes currently with their expectations for future profit margins, for currency fluctuations, for tariffs. So but again, this is not a political podcast. So, A16 base level iPad. So, by the way, this is something that I also wanted to look up. iPad, base iPad, tech specs. So we are keeping the vibrant colors here. Unfortunately, not quite on the iPad Air. So 5-core CPU, 2 performance, 3 efficiency cores, 4-core GPUs. The A16, of course, maxed out at 5 GPU cores. So it's not a huge bin in the like I know a lot of people are just used to a series chips to having 6 GPU cores, but that's not even true for the A18, for example. A lot of people think that the A18 is just a bint A18 Pro, but that's not true. The A18 is actually a separate die. And pretty much the biggest difference is that it maxes out at 5 GPU cores rather than the 6 GPU cores. And then the bint A18 is where we got 4 GPU cores on the iPhone 16e. So a lot to keep in mind. If there's so many products where now with different brandings like 16e, obviously now we have iPads without any kind of branding except for the chip they come with, right? This is the iPad brackets A16, and then we have like an iPad Air with M3, so it has like a sub branding like Air, but otherwise it's only named after the chip. While previously we actually had iPads Airs 4, 5th generation, stuff like that. So if I get something wrong, I apologize. It's just a lot, especially coming freshly off work. I just got time to change my t-shirt. So this iPad, front camera. Okay, so there are no big changes here. Like Wi-Fi 6 support is still the same. This is basically just a chip swap and the elimination of the 64 gigabyte version. The A16 chip provides a jump in performance for everyday tasks and experience in iPadOS while still providing all-day battery life. Compared to the previous gen, the updated iPad with A16 is nearly 30% faster. In fact, compared to iPad with A13 Bionics, users will see up to a 50% improvement in overall performance. So the previous generation featured the A14 chip, 30% faster than that, and which actually is not too bad, right? If you consider A14 was built on TSMC's first generation 5 nanometer node, so N5, then the A15 chip was built on N5P, and now A16 is built on N4. So the fact that we're getting 30% improvements on what is technically still the same node family is actually not bad. It actually beats out a lot of the improvements we see from like going from like Zen 4 to Zen 5. So just for some industry consideration. And yeah, A13 was built on a second generation 7 nanometer node that's N7P. So of course you see a bigger change here overall. A16 makes the updated iPad up to 6 times faster than the best-selling Android tablet. Number 6, which tablet is that? Testing conducted by Apple and using iPads as well as production Qualcomm SM375 based Android tablet. I don't know which chip that is. SM6375. It's the Snapdragon 695 5G chip. Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed like this to be like the most popular Android tablet, but I guess it's easy to also manipulate the numbers. Maybe it's just the most popular Android tablet overall or something like that. How did they word this exactly? Then the best-selling Android tablet. Okay, so they might have just taken accumulated sales over a number of years. That tablet is probably like, I mean, it runs Android 14, so it cannot be extremely old. Best-selling Android tablet on publicly available sales data over the last 12 months. I would love to know which Android tablet that is. I would be shocked if it costs more than $180 or something like that. But that's funny. Qualcomm 695 Android tablet. So yeah, it's like a Lenovo Tab at 149, a Tab 90 from Blackview, a Xiaomi Redno tablet, if those are even correct chips. But yeah, all of these devices are dramatically this says pills, like drug pills. Like that's not how the plural of tablets in German is not tablet. Galaxy Tab A9 Plus, could that be? I mean, that could be it. And that's not the best received Android device. That could actually be it. I mean, they say it's Android 13, but like maybe like an A10. Like what does the Galaxy Tab A10 feature? A10.1. That's not how it works. A10.1. What the actual like? Is there no like? Is there only like the A9 Plus? Jesus Christ! It has 8 gigs of memory. It has 90 hertz, so at least in that regard, it's superior. So, and I guess there's probably some new version of that, or they just chose some other tablet. But yeah, if you had to put a gun to my head, I would say it's very likely that the Samsung tablet is probably the tablet that is the best selling Android tablet. But could be also something like a Lenovo product. So that's definitely plenty interesting to find out. Apple likes to play around with numbers in that regard. They will not lie to you, but they will definitely be a little bit misleading in some regards. Everyday tasks and experiences in iPad OS. Again, before you buy this product, wait until you know how much RAM it has, because that could be a big difference between like an older, like potentially refurbished or just a discounted iPad Air being a much better deal than this. Right. Yeah, however you want to look at it, if it does have 6 gigs of RAM, I think it actually makes sense at MSRP. Now for the 256 gig version at 449, probably also keep an eye out on older iPad Airs at that point. In fact, compared to the iPad with A13, blah, 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 versus Android tablet. So this is here, they are now advertising just regular ass iPad OS features, so not Apple Intelligence, which interestingly enough, though, I think some people oversee, there is some stuff inside iPad OS that is AI powered, but it's machine learning, right? Apple differentiates clearly between their regular machine learning features that are available on devices with like a neural engine, A12, A13, A14 chips, 3 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of RAM, 6 gigs of RAM, doesn't really matter. But then Apple Intelligence is for M1 and up, A17 Pro and up, and 8 gigs of RAM and up, right? So they clearly differentiate here between the capabilities of a product necessary to run something like audio recording and transcription, and running like the more advanced LLMs that are powering Apple Intelligence. better for the environment. The new iPad Air and updated iPad are designed with the environment in mind. As part of Apple 2030, the company's ambitious goal to be carbon neutral across its entire carbon footprint by the end of this decade, Apple is transitioning to renewable electricity for manufacturing and investing in wind and solar projects around the world to address the electricity used to charge all Apple products. Apple talks a lot about like traditional green energy, I would say, like wind and geothermal energy and solar, of course. I wonder at what point they will talk a lot more about nuclear energy, because especially if you want to build out a lot more factories running a lot of chips simultaneously for like private cloud compute Apple Intelligence, there might be some need to run more stuff on nuclear energy than just talking about like water, solar, wind, which are all great energy sources. But a lot of companies right now are pushing for higher adoption of nuclear energy because they just simply aren't able to meet their green energy goals otherwise at all. More recycled and renewable materials each feature at least 30% recycled content overall, including 100% recycled aluminum in the enclosure and 100% recycled rare earth minerals in all magnets. The batteries contain 100% recycled cobalt and, in a first for iPad, over 95% recycled lithium. So this is something that has been a big question over the last few years. As battery needs rise, especially also with the advent of electric vehicles, which obviously need far larger batteries than any iPad or Mac or something like that. Will we be able to recycle lithium? And yeah, seemingly over the last couple of years, recycling of lithium has really like improved by almost like an order of a magnitude. Now, whether or not it happens at the right magnitude, right, at the right amount, is a big question, but it's definitely seemingly possible, right? I'm not saying, by the way, like some people will misconstrue this, like you cannot recycle 95% of lithium that is in a battery once it dies, right? But you can recycle lithium and then put 95% old lithium and 5% new lithium in a new battery. I don't think that iPhones, for example, would have enough supply currently of recycled lithium to get to even 80% recycled lithium percentage inside their batteries. But hey, it's a start. I don't think that any of these these numbers will necessarily rise to 100% on all products. I think that Apple will meet their 2030 goals with like offsets, right? Like, I don't know, like carbon taxes and donations and building out wind energy and solar energy farms that they themselves might not need, but they're like, you know what, we're using a little bit of like carbon footprint here, but we are compensating for that by like providing energy to like these villages in China or something like that. So definitely interesting. You see the prices here. $599 for the iPad. Across the board, $150 upcharge to get 5G. They do not talk about the use of any new Wi-Fi modems or 5G modems. So that's one thing that was rumored, especially for the iPad Air, that it would be like the first product featuring Apple's in-house designed Wi-Fi modem. That modem is now rumored to be like a Wi-Fi 7 modem and even good enough for the entire iPhone 17 family. So maybe internal plans just changed and maybe they're still working on it, refining it. But it's just not, it's a bit too good for like a mid-end product like the iPad Air, and definitely too good for the base level iPad. But I couldn't tell you. Maybe there's like a surprise component in here. But yeah, the iPad base model, $349, and again, $150 more to get it with 5G. And across the board, you can get some nice educational discounts Very, very important. If you can get that at that point, I would actually recommend you just buy your stuff through Apple because you get the superior service and stuff like that. Yes, you might potentially get an even bigger discount through a site like Amazon, but then you have to wait and you have to make sure you actually get it. While with Apple Education, it's a guaranteed discount. Yeah, but that's about it for the iPads today. I mean, we can look if there's anything new that we might have missed about these devices. Beat and Will limited edition Solo 4 with playful, nostalgic aesthetic. Yeah, I don't care about that. Um, Man, whenever I see the iCloud logo, I just imagine that we finally get news to like Apple gives you like 10 gigabytes of base iCloud storage rather than 5. But at this point, I have just given up all hope. Apple releases spring color iPhone cases and Apple Watch bands. New iPad 11 lacks support for Apple Intelligence features. That's, of course, not a big surprise here. Yeah, otherwise, all stuff that we have kind of predicted. Guys, let me know what else you would like to see me cover today. Wait, what's that? That iPad 11 with A17 Pro chip and Apple Intelligence rumor was wrong. Yes, definitely. So, braided solo loop, springtime colors. Okay. Yeah, okay, so all their summarization is the same one as mine. I don't think that I've missed something. Thankfully, you guys also asked me some questions that made me jump to the right spec points. I'm very, very sure we'll probably getting the M4 MacBook Air tomorrow. Or at the worst on Thursday. I would be very, very surprised if Apple releases the iPad Air this week together with a cheaper base level iPad, or cheaper versus the Air, but also better value thanks to double the storage. But not the MacBook Air. At that point, like, sure, I mean, it's not like the iPad Air overshadows the current M3 MacBook Air, but look, for example, at the pricing. Right, look at the iPad Air. It's $599 with an M3 chip, and sure, it's a bint chip or whatever, but it's $599, right? It's $400 less expensive than the M2 MacBook Air. So, and it's $500 less expensive than the M3 MacBook Air. So, at that point, in my opinion, it definitely would make sense for the M4 MacBook Air to steal a little bit of its limelight, jump in, give people good value where they wanted to see it. We've seen a lot of purchases, like kind of rekindled for the Macs ever since the Apple Silicon transition. The M4 family also seems to have boosted sales last quarter quite nicely, at least partially in my opinion, because of more memory, but also a bigger performance uplift generationally than the M3 was versus the M2. So yeah, I do believe that for a much cleaner lineup, Apple now needs an M4 MacBook Air. But that's not to say that any lineup is actually bad, right? Because if I look at it right now, shop iPad. So we now have the iPad mini at $499. There are often discounts down to like $449. At that point, I definitely recommend either get it at like a educational discount on Apple, or get it through a third-party retailer at a lower price. And that's an A17 product. The iPad, right? An A16 product, cheaper than that. No laminated screen, no Apple Pencil Pro support. So definitely makes sense for, despite the larger screen, for it to be cheaper than the iPad mini. If you basically want to combine the niceties of the iPad mini with the form factor of the regular iPad, you get the iPad Air. And if you want the nicest iPad available, you get the iPad Pro. I think this lineup is actually very nice. Like, we can argue about individual choices, whether or not the iPad mini maybe should be a little less expensive or have a nicer screen, if the iPad Air should have some form of promotion, if the base iPad should have better Apple Pencil support, right? But those are nitpicks. Those are things that are easily compensated once you can get the device at like 5 or 10% discounts. You can argue whether or not the iPad Pros are fairly priced. Otherwise, they're pretty much perfect in terms of hardware, though. M4 tandem OLED, great battery life, fantastic speakers. Yeah, these devices are fantastic. But they are very expensive, especially the 13-inch version at $12.99. Yeah, but the iPad lineup looks clean. Looking at the Mac lineup, explore all Mac. So we got the M4 Mac Mini, the M4 iMac, the M4 Pro, and M4 Max MacBook Pros just at the end of last year. We will be getting the M4 MacBook Air pretty soon, hopefully tomorrow. And then, unfortunately, just for your own sanity, you kind of have to like ignore these two because those are like Apple's premium desktops, but they run at this point on a 2-generation old architecture. So really, really questionable. But obviously, Apple never made like an M3 Ultra, so they couldn't upgrade these devices. I mean, they could have given them at least the Max chips on the Mac Studio, but they didn't. So, but yeah, supposedly by mid of this year, maybe as early second half, we will finally get M4 Max and M4 Ultra versions of these products. What is also funny though is if you follow this stuff, you will know we still have not gotten a full die shot analysis of an M4 Max processor. So I'm still not actually sure if it features like some kind of Apple Ultra Fusion interconnect. So I'm just going insane, finally waiting for these two. At this point, Apple just might wait and upgrade them both with like an M5 chip and surprise all of us and skip two generations, not just one. Oh, Jesus, this is so crazy. But yeah, if you're buying any of these devices, so Mac Mini, iMac, MacBook Pro, those are absolutely fine as they are. I would argue Mac Mini with an external screen for most people will make more sense than a standalone iMac. And if you're in the market for the MacBook Air, at least wait a little, because even if you might not be interested in the M4 MacBook Air, you might get the M3 or M2 MacBook Airs for a lot cheaper, even just $100 over what they currently are, right? With discounts, you can often get like the M2 MacBook Air for like $850. Maybe by the time the M4 comes around, it will be like an $750 to $800 product, which definitely is pretty much unmatched in terms of like snappiness and responsiveness at that price range, thanks to Apple Silicon. Yeah, but so that's what Apple announced today. Definitely nothing crazy, but hey, something was in the air, and I'm glad that we got to cover it. Apple expected to announce new MacBook Air tomorrow, so nice. Following today's announcement of a new iPad Air with an M3 chip, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman now says that Apple plans to announce the long-rumored MacBook Air with the M4 chip tomorrow. So on X, he said, expect the M4 MacBook Air tomorrow as part of a new product wave. Gurman initially said that the MacBook Air would be announced earlier than the iPhone 16e and the new iPad Air, but that information was evidently wrong. Oh, I'm so sorry. Really saying, watch the M4 MacBook Air having been CPU and or GPU, and as chipset nerds oh my God, what's up? Like, Jesus Christ, I cannot speak today. Raging. Jesus, that was horrible. Wait, but why? Why? That wouldn't present any changes. Because look at the M3 MacBook Air. It is binned. The base version is binned. For $200, you get more storage and you get the fully enabled M3 chip. But on the cheapest version, which I really don't recommend, I really don't think 256 gigabytes is quite enough. Like, this model is actually really good because yeah, $200 for 256 gigabytes more storage is outrageous, but you actually get some nice extra stuff. You get the faster dual port charger, and you get the fully enabled M3 processor, right? Now with the M4 MacBook Air, you also get just a more versatile product overall, granted across every price range, but I think at $12.99 it will make even more sense than the M3 did, because at $12.99 you get pretty close to the prices of the of the MacBook Pro, right? Which obviously kind of hurts if you're like a generation behind, but at least if you are on the same generation, and you get now the extra USB-C port, support for multiple displays simultaneously while your laptop is actually opened. In my opinion, that will make the M4 MacBook Air probably the first MacBook Air in a while that is legit like worth upgrading, right? More storage, more RAM, even with some of Apple's more ridiculous pricing, even if you are not a high-end buyer. At least that's how I think. Jamie Ibrahim, by the way, images of the M4 Max die just released about an hour ago on X. Jesus Christ. What? Do you have a link or something like that? Because I would save it on my M4 Max. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna make myself really big right now, and I'm gonna go on Twitter, actually on my Mac. I can get pretty political on there, so I usually try to censor what I see. Off topic, it looks like the M4 Max die doesn't have an Ultra Fusion Connect again. Okay. Okay. Jesus Christ, where? Wait. Where is the actual die shot? Because I see Anderson, Midnight John 1, posting something. Where does he have it from? And by the way, guys, we have more people watching. A shout out for you to do all the YouTube jazz, as we call it around here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it up with anybody who you think might enjoy it. You guys see, if you comment something interesting and fresh, I'll respond to it. You can also leave you can leave a super chat or a super sticker. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube or support you over on Patreon. All support goes a long way. Thank you so much. My God, he has a photo, but it's like M4 Max. That's not it. Jesus. Really saying, OMG, big mark. Is it M4 Max die? Because I see like very like low quality images from people who are like screenshotting something. I'm not even sure, which is funny. When I look at M4 Max die on Twitter, I'm like the #1 guy who have posted about it in the past, basically begging people to like finally analyze it. M4 Max die. Okay, just gonna write in M4 Max then. Okay, so for one, there's nothing I'm gonna hide from you on Twitter, so I can just make myself a small mark again. Hopefully, you guys will be less afraid of me at that point. So opening Twitter. So it looks like the M4 Max. By the way, shout out to Jimmy James Tech, friend of the channel, friend on Twitter. Off topic, it looks like the M4 Max doesn't have Ultra Fusion Connect again. So, Jesus Christ, what does that mean? Apple M4 Max. Why so low quality? Like M4 Max has been around for such a long time. Left M3 Max, right M4 Max, both have the wiring layer peeled off. The photos are really nice. What the actual? Okay, that would be crazy, chat, if we ended up getting M4 Max once again without. That being said, though, Apple might not want to connect those over Ultra Fusion. They might want to do like a more advanced interconnect where you have a full-on interposer die down below. That's partially what's rumored for the M5 family. But I'm just really curious about stuff like this. And I'm not sure what the source is. Or this looks identical, right? This is just this, but like a slightly different angle. The bubbles are the same. So whatever source the people are working with, this is looks like the same one. Jesus Christ. Like I mentioned it once during this video and now it pops up. But yeah, like that would be crazy if M4 Max is still missing the interconnect. Where's the chip for us poor folk? This poor folk. Why am I talking like this today? For us poor folk, I'm giving up on speaking today. This M4 Max is for Big Mark. Yeah, but even then, like I have an M1 Max MacBook Pro, so and I'm probably not buying M5 Max devices either. So it's not until 2 nanometer, and it's not until like tandem OLED on MacBooks that I am upgrading. And even then, I might not upgrade to the first generation because at this point, I'm just using my MacBook only for my live streams and for a tiny bit of like desktop work I do at home. Most stuff I do on my M1 iPad Pro just fine. Okay, so I'm not gonna scroll through everything. The risk of Twitter being weird and too much porn filled is just too big. But yeah, like this is the M4 Max die, I guess. Do we know if the new iPads have C1? Seemingly not. I think for one, Apple would have mentioned it. I also think they still have enough supply from Qualcomm where it just wouldn't make sense to like not use chips that they have already paid for. And the other part is like iPads were not really rumored, as far as I remember, to feature the C1 early on. I remember, granted, that rumor was quite a while ago, that iPads were rumored to be the first products with Apple's Wi-Fi modem, but now the rumors have kind of transitioned that the Wi-Fi modems that Apple are building are already premium enough to be included across the entire iPhone 17 family. So that is something I'm really interested to see. Obviously, the new base level iPad is Wi-Fi 6. The iPad Air is Wi-Fi 6E. I'm assuming Apple is just reusing the same Wi-Fi modems that they had in the past. If it was C1, if it was C1, at least for the 5G modems, I kind of would assume that they might have pushed pricing down to $100 or something like that, or at least advertised it in any way. But they are not, so let's see. So, guys, you see, if you suggest something interesting, if you find something of interest, it's definitely cool. And now I'm really curious if we'll ever get like an M4 Ultra product either. Mark Gurman said it would come to the SE4, low-end iPads, and iPhone 17 Air. Yeah, like, but Apple is not talking about it. That's why I'm a little bit confused. They're not talking here about 5G at all in a way that's like, oh, there's something new about the 5G in this iPad. But hey, maybe once iFixit breaks down the device and they find the C1 inside, maybe Apple deemed it good enough. Who knows? Though, really, for the base level iPad, they should have really pushed the pricing down. If they have a new C1 that they have more pricing control over than the previous Qualcomm modems, then charging $150 over a $350 base price is just not nice. I can kind of get it for the iPad Air. It starts at $600, $150 is 25%, right? But like over the base level iPad, it's not quite what I would have liked. Guys, is there something else in the news in the recent times that we've missed? Some kind of reviews? Like, I'm not sure if this is worth reacting to, for example. Like, I mean, we just got the RTX 5070. It's a $550 GPU with 12 gigs of memory. It's really, really underwhelming, especially in comparison to the marketing that NVIDIA tried to pull before it. But I also don't think it's really worth covering on this channel. And that leaves us something like Mr. Who's the Boss talked about the Xiaomi 15 Ultra with all its crazy camera tech, and also a prototype that comes with like a 4/3 image sensor, so it's larger than a full 1-inch sensor that kind of attaches almost like via MagSafe to the product. Maybe the production isn't there yet since Apple's gonna sell a lot of these. Yeah, I mean, like C1 might just be like like Apple really optimized it also for the iPhone or something like that early on. Maybe on the iPad, it just makes sense to reuse whatever they have. I still think that Apple just will want to get rid of as much supply of Qualcomm parts as they can. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that. Like where some rumors might have pointed to it, but ultimately it's not happening, right? Yeah, so I might react
because
quickly
the phone's
to
camera
this.
alone.
Hopefully, won't get this video demonetized in any way. But in the meantime, if something new comes out, if you guys get to know anything about this about the new iPads or anything Apple related or anything nice and big in the tech world, or you feel generous enough to leave a super chat or sticker or become a channel member, let's go through the video. Let's see what Mr. Boss has to say about these two camera kind of flagships, and then we can kind of wrap up for today.
Two phones right here. So this is the next-gen Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and it has the greatest camera system that I have ever seen on a phone.
Okay, so let's say we wanted to zoom into that cathedral over there. We keep going. We're at 10x, 20x, go all the way to 120 times. Capture. Oh my God. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it does some sharpening and shit like that. After that, like its native zoom is 4.3x. Even if you compensate for that, like and do double, like it's at 12 at what 120x. What? How far did he zoom in?
X, go all the way to 120.
Yeah, like that one requires a lot of post-processing. You won't get this kind of quality from a native 4.3x zoom camera.
Times. Capture. Oh my God. That's ridiculous.
Then this is the company's even more bonkers, never before seen or covered Future phone that, let's just say, isn't even close to anything I've used before. This thing is so precious that someone has actually flown all the way from China to hand deliver the thing. So let's find out what makes this crazy and then what makes this even crazier. So this is how the 15 Ultra comes presented. Pretty classic Xiaomi style insert on top, which has
we have of course covered the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the other Ultra products that are about to come out, the Vivo X200 Ultra, the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. We have covered how some of them might not be as ultra as one might think. For example, the Vivo X200 Ultra is keeping the same 1x1.28-inch sensor from the Vivo X200 Pro. We've covered how some of them might get battery downgrades, like the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. The international version comes with a 5400 milliamp hour battery. The Chinese version comes with 6000. So this, by the way, also goes back to, I know a lot of you guys have asked, when is Apple, for example, adopting silicon carbon battery? By the way, I used to say silicon carbide batteries. I blame that entirely on MKBHD because early on in that technology, I was like, who cares, right? So I just picked up whatever I heard. After doing some research, after a Twitter thread today that, I don't remember who started it, but thank you to whoever did it. Yeah, silicon carbide is for EVs. Silicon carbon is like the main tech for smartphones.
Ejector, USB-C cable, manuals, and then
so USB-C cable, that is still USB-A on one side. This is insane to me.
USB-C cable, manuals, and then a hard shell clear case.
Hard shell clear case. You can see the camera ring is so freaking big. I really wonder how they're dealing with stuff like wireless charging. Like even if like you can fit your wireless charger on it, I just wonder like, or you can fit it on a wireless charger. I just wonder like how the camera doesn't get in the way of it. Ugh.
Case, and that is
it also doesn't feature like magnets inside, so I'm a little confused by that.
is it. Even though this is a full-size box, there's still no charger. Probably because the phone's camera alone takes up half the space.
Yeah.
Man, I'm butchering this peel. Okay, there we go.
So I find this device actually prettier than I expected. I don't like the bump around the camera, if you can see what I mean. Like, I wish this was just a flat out protrusion, or I guess a protrusion isn't flat, but you know what I mean. Um, but I've seen some people say it's ugly. I don't actually think it is. I think its cameras can like trip you up if you're or have like this whole phobia and shit like that. But I don't think it's bad. The Global 15 Ultra has 5400 milliampere hours, so much more for the silicon carbon. Yeah, this is one thing, by the way. Oh, thank you, by the way, really. I kind of started my thought but didn't finish it. You guys see, I'm really, really tired after work today. But the main point about it that I was trying to make is some people ask, well, when is Apple adopting stuff like that's even in the Vivo X200 and whatever? Like, none of the devices that we talk about who adopt technologies like even I guess this sensor right now, but let's ignore that. Obviously, you can make more of that. But stuff like silicon carbon batteries, and before that, it was stuff like ultrasonic fingerprint sensors, right? These early adopter technologies initially. And I've seen people ask, like, well, why doesn't Apple do it? Well, do I need to remind you that out of the top 10 best-selling smartphone models in the world, Apple makes up like half the list with like basically only 5 to 6 iPhone models to sell. None of these, not the Xiaomi Pro, not the Xiaomi Ultra, not the Vivo Pro, not an Oppo Pro, not an Vivo Ultra, not a not an Oppo Ultra. None of those products make it even in like the top 15 or top 20 most often. So the idea, and by that point, the gap between like the top 4 or 5 versus like the lower part of the top 20 where you might find one of these products, that gap in sales is so huge that whenever people ask me like, oh, silicon carbon, I mean, sure, like technically Apple could get it, but like it would severely limit the supply even of just the Pro. Let's say Apple just picks it for the Pro Max iPhone. The Pro Max iPhone outsells all Vivo Pros and Ultras, all Oppo Pros and Ultras, and all Xiaomi Pros and Ultras combined. The idea that they could power the entire Pro family with it, or the entire family of iPhones, like across 16, 16 Plus, 16 Pro, 16 Pro Max, is so ridiculous that I really wonder sometimes what understanding of reality people have whenever they ask for certain stuff. Apple already likes adopting bleeding edge technology. We know that, especially when it comes to new notes from TSMC. But Apple cannot, for one, Apple cannot be the first at everything in that regard, right? Chinese companies clearly right now are cooperating a lot more to make sure that China has a bigger global footprint. There might not be any more silicon carbon battery supply than what we get from Vivo and Oppo. So Apple, on top of that, couldn't in no way, shape, or form suddenly muster like 5 to 10x the supply of those models just for the pros. And even if Apple like took all the supply that's currently going into Vivo and Oppo and Xiaomi and stuff like that, it would still be questionable if that supply, even if it was reduced to zero by all those Chinese companies, like would be enough for even just one of the Pro iPhones.
Wow, this looks incredible. Now, there is lots to like.
I mean, I just praised it for not being ugly. Incredible is something else to me.
And dislike about this phone. But there's only one thing that I want to show you with it. One thing that I do think is an absolute game changer. And that is this. I'm not even talking about the cameras in general, literally this one specific telephoto zoom camera. Because here's the thing, for the entire history of multi-camera smartphones, you've had a main camera, your best quality camera, and then a few secondary cameras flanking that main camera, which aren't as high quality.
Well, that's still the case here. The ultra-wide is actually surprisingly bad. It's actually worse in many spec points than the iPhone's ultra-wide camera, with the iPhones being a 1 by 2.55 inch sensor, and this being like a 1 by 2.7 inch sensor roughly. And then it has a weird like intermediate telephoto camera, like a 3x telephoto, but it's a smaller sensor than the periscope camera. It's a 50 megapixel sensor rather than 200 megapixel on the periscope camera. So yeah, it has a nice 1-inch main sensor. It does come with some issues with like focal distance, but that telephoto, the 200x, is the 200x, the 200 megapixel one with the Samsung sensor, that is 1 by 1.4 inches in size. It's nice, but I don't like how people are ignoring shit like ultra wides at all. Like, I criticized Apple so much for the ultra wide on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max being barely any better than the 12 megapixel one on the previous generation. And here we have like these supposed camera focused flagships come with worse ultra wides than that. What's the point in that?
This phone is the first
It also does some things differently. Like previously, the 1x sensor, the main sensor, actually had variable aperture. That is no longer the case. So, and this is, I wish that some people would just like cover more, because these differences are important. Going to gsmarena.com. You guys know I really like GSM Arena, especially for this kinds of coverage. So Xiaomi 15 Ultra, they actually made a review, so we can actually react to a few things. So one thing I want to compliment, it actually has, this is the international 5400 milliampere version. It has pretty solid battery life, and it really seems to give you like an almost 10% increase over the Galaxy S25 Ultra. So it really shows that the Snapdragon 8 Elite is a good and somewhat efficient chip, not as good and efficient in that regard as the A18 Pro, but it definitely can give you great battery life with a bit more battery capacity. So in that regard, Samsung really disappointed by not giving you even like 5200. And yeah, a big generational increase. You see the improvement based on the higher capacity, the more efficient parts, and also the display. Well, it's not the brightest in town necessarily. It is still brighter than something like the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which maxes out at roughly 1450 in that regard. So what did I want to show you beyond that? There's actually performance. So this chip delivers pretty standard 8 Elite performance, not necessarily the greatest, but in terms of sustained performance, there's like some weirdness going on. So I will wait with further I guess reviewing or just reviewing the reviews until I see more. But the fact that it couldn't like complete a 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme test, neither in performance mode nor in regular balance mode, is a little bit weird to me. So yeah, that's neither here nor there. Let's actually look at the spec points. 15 Ultra. So when we look at the camera, right? So it's 50 megapixel. If it's an f1.6 aperture, 23 millimeter wide, a full 1-inch sensor, no sensor shift image stabilization. It's interesting. They also call this dual pixel PDAF. So it's not like Apple calls this stuff focus pixels, but I believe that you would use that term if not every one of your pixels can be used for that. So I'm just a little bit wondering why this is the case. But this could just be like some kind of like not full-on translation or something like that. So they do have that slightly weird intermediate step with the 3x telephoto. Granted, that one has a nice aperture, so it will have some advantages. This one is 100 millimeters, so it's a little bit over 4x optical zoom. You see, though, it's a much larger sensor than the 3x. At this point, I wonder if they couldn't have just like gone some medium route and like combine this into one like 3.5x optical zoom, maybe with a slightly wider aperture than that, but keeping this sensor. Not sure if that would have worked. And then again, the disappointment here, in my opinion, that 115 degree ultra wide with a 1 by 2.7 inch sensor, that is not really the greatest thing, in my opinion. It doesn't even have like the wider aperture that like Samsung pairs its ultra wide with. But also, interestingly enough, versus the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it actually is missing one camera specification, and that is the Xiaomi 14 Ultra was capable of delivering variable aperture from f1.6 all the way to f4.0. So you could have actually played around with bokeh depth of field and stuff like that much more dynamically than you can now on the new one. So it's interesting how these technologies are coming in and out of products. Like we had variable aperture going back to like the Galaxy S9 family, and they're still being introduced, but then they're also being removed. So I'm just and we also have like 5x optical zooms that are well, before that we had 10x optical zooms that then got downgraded to 5x but with larger sensors, and now we have 5x being removed for like 4.3x. So here I would actually say that having these two sensors, these two camera solutions being separate made a little bit of sense. With the new solution, honestly, I wish they had removed this telephoto and just found more place for, you know, stuff that suffers whenever you really compromise internal space, like speakers, microphones, haptics. All that stuff has never been the greatest on the Chinese Ultra products. So we'll have to see how it ultimately plays out. Also, that selfie camera is just trash relatively. Like, I know Apple's sensor is like worse than that in a way, but Apple has the far better image pipeline in my opinion for selfies. Plus the pixels here actually get ridiculously small. Apple's sensor is like what, 1 by 3.6 inches, but it's 12 megapixels. Here, like you would kind of have to bin it down to like 8 megapixel and shit like that. So definitely not the greatest thing in the world. So they're just trying to push certain specs, but some stuff is just left in the past, right? So we just talked about that selfie camera for the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It's still the same camera on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So yeah, you can take it as you want. Not saying that this is a bad phone by any means because of it, but I am trying to say these phones might not quite be as ultra as like super enthusiastic Mr. Who's the Boss reviews might lead you to believe.
Time that I would say that that's not the case. This telephoto camera is so freaking good that it has now basically become my main camera, and
What? Why?
Completely changes how you use a thing.
So the first place that you're going to notice this zoom camera in action is when you're zooming into things. For a very long time, Samsung has kind of set the benchmark for long-range zoom photography. And
yeah, because they had 10x optical zoom.
Take a look at their latest.
But even then, by the way, I have criticized reviewers like Mr. Who's the Boss who were like, oh, 10x zoom here and 3x zoom here. But the 3x zoom was garbage, right? For a long time. It's like this outdated 10 megapixel camera with a crappy old small sensor like that they have on here. And then the 10x was like, why? What am I zooming in 10x in? And like I would argue 5x was the perfect compromise to get rid of the 3x, get rid of the 10x, make the 3x, make the 5x as big as possible, as versatile as possible. Maybe down the road introduce something like what Sony does with actually variable zoom, or at least with variable aperture, and you would have a perfect solution with a 3-camera phone. In fact, if you go with variable zoom down the road, you can actually dumb it down to 2 cameras. Maybe you can have one camera that handles both ultra wide and wide photography, and then one camera that handles everything from like 4x telephoto to like 6-7x telephoto.
S25 Ultra. They achieved that with a 5 times optical zoom, 50 megapixel camera, which is great. But this special camera right here is a 4.3 times optical zoom camera, so actually a little less than Samsung, but it's 200 megapixel. And it's not just resolution, because as we know, resolution is not exactly the most reliable spec. It only takes a very quick look at the telephoto cameras on these two phones to see that the sensor on Xiaomi's is enormous. It's over 3 times the size of the one on the Samsung. That's the spec that matters. So let's say, for example, we want to zoom into some of the intricate brickwork on that window. Let's start with the Samsung, which, as you'd expect, looks really crisp up until about 30 times where it does break down. But let's keep going until 100 times zoom, take the shot, and that is not bad at all, considering how far away the thing is. Okay, so same thing on Xiaomi now. As we keep zooming in, the preview does look a little bit cleaner than it did on Sammy, but also not dramatically so. That is until we hit capture, because geez Louise. At this point, it is an absolute landslide win for Xiaomi.
Yeah.
And that's partly because of this really high quality, high resolution zoom camera, but it is also partly because of AI processing. So when you zoom in past the 20 times mark on the Xiaomi, you will see this little AI indicator pop up. If that's yellow, it means that when you take the shot, it's going to comb through and essentially upgrade everything using its best estimation of what it thinks they look like. And this part of the equation, you might completely hate, because the more AI is involved in
Master, size matters. It absolutely does.
question.
I have criticized Apple for sometimes using way too small sensors for my taste. But yeah, like I absolutely don't disagree here. Like it's just I wish that we ended up with more balanced phones where if you are going the ultra route, at least also go all out on something like cooling. Every year, for example, Xiaomi advertises like more and more advanced and larger vapor chambers, but they just like never fully live up to those promises.
Of what actually is a photo. But I do think that it's quite tastefully integrated here. It feels so satisfying to see your blurry 120 times zoom photos suddenly transform after you've captured. The results can be weird, let's say 5% of the time, but then they are actually making the photo a lot better 95% of the time. The setting isn't hidden away inside some sort of clunky image editor. It's literally one click to turn on and off just before you capture.
But I wouldn't be surprised if Apple offers something like that down the road. Because right now they've been very apprehensive in changing the raw composition of the image, right? They do not go all out with something like cleanup by actually letting you like delete the front and foremost thing in the image. Well, it lets you delete it, but the thing that it generates behind it is just like not good. But if Apple introduces like a 5x telephoto this year with a larger sensor, maybe slightly wider aperture to handle more light, I wouldn't be surprised if they said, and we're using the latest transformer large language models to further assist you. We already have like great sensor shift OIS. Now the larger sensor lets in more light, all that stuff, plus AI help. We doubled zoom quality, right? That's what Apple could say at that point. Master, think the 17 Pro will use the same main sensor. Some people have said it would use a slightly smaller sensor, going from a 1x1.28 to a 1x3-inch sensor, but supposedly using a much better sensor. But I have not heard too many rumors either like confirming or denying that. Massachusetts iOS saying, dude, you know it has a 5-core CPU, the iPad A16, and the iPad A14 has a 6-core CPU. Yeah, but it has one CPU. The CPU core that's disabled on the A16 is an efficiency core. The main system performance that you get is from your performance cores, and the A16 is faster than the A14 in that regard by actually quite a lot. So if we go to Geekbench 6 here for a moment, Geekbench 6. So browser, iOS results, single core results. So if we look at A16 here, 2,500 points, usually more like 2,600 points, a little bit higher than that. Yeah, like this. And the A14, meanwhile, is here around 2,000. So you get 25 to 30% more performance in that regard. I wouldn't really focus on that E-core bin being something really bad. Xiaomi has our backs in the winter. Yeah, like then that's not even true. I guess maybe you can push the phone to performance mode, which in that regard I would also really want to see how different the benchmarks are between performance and balanced. But yeah, and yeah, Apple likes binning stuff. We know that. The fact that they have all this control over their own chips makes them really versatile for them.
And also, even when it's turned off, this is still fundamentally the best zoom camera that I've ever used on a phone.
So it's got a great zoom camera. It takes great zoom photos. That much is not the slightest bit surprising. The bigger change that you notice is when you start to use this camera for other things. So for example, if you grab this, and let's start by recording video using the phone's
So this video quality immediately, I already know that the iPhone takes better quality than this. The iPhone might be warmer, but his skin looks ashen almost immediately, which going back 10 seconds,
this camera.
this is not the way, at least the video he produces himself, that's not the way he himself wants to look, right? Professional production, Xiaomi 14 Ultra video.
That's how it will look. It's nice. The phone's got a top-of-the-line 1-inch sensor for this wide camera, but it still looks like phone footage. But now,
Yeah, but the iPhone looks way better than that. I can promise you that.
flicking over to the phone's telephoto camera, it's the complete vibe change.
It's really not. It's a zoom, and it makes it like what? Will you put it 4 times further away?
does have that professional camera look to it. And that's
It
part of the
doesn't. Oh, Jesus Christ. I have no words. Like, this is where overstating comes into play, where you are like, where I feel like as a reviewer, you're like focused on one spec point, right? And you're like, oh my God, this one spec point changes everything. Guys, have you considered using your camera constantly only on its 4x zoom camera?
the fact that telephoto cameras just in general have more background blur.
Yeah, but like that's not always a great thing. You know, you can take this phone and actually position it closer to you.
But it's combining that with this supersized sensor, which means that you both get even more of that separation because bigger sensors make more of it, but then also with basically zero hit to the quality of the footage, like you would have on just about any other phone in which the telephoto camera gets
We have a thermal test for the Xiaomi 15 Ultra against other phones. You can go to GSM Arena and just look at how it performs, and then you can take other data. But it's not bad, but it's not really like what I would have expected given all their crazy marketing about like and yet even better like vapor chamber.
8K. Plus you can film slow motion.
It definitely seems better than Samsung at this point, but like Samsung has like disappointed year after year.
Lens, 4K, 120 frames per second. And for a phone, this is as cinematic as it has gotten.
What?
Thus far. And it's all topped off with portrait mode. Because portraits of people will always be more flattering when you take a few steps back and use a telephoto camera, better telephoto camera equals better portraits. And remember, you don't even need to use portrait mode to get this effect. All of these coming shots are just simple photos taken on auto. So don't get me wrong, Xiaomi has issues that they need to work on, like their software
when
update
was
schedule.
the last time
fact that
Apple
this phone is
released
pretty
the iPad? What chip was before this one with the i16? They released the last iPad was an A14 iPad. But I actually couldn't tell you when exactly they released it. So it was A14, had 4 gigs of memory. And instead of upgrading it last year, they instead reduced its price from MSRP $449 to $349. And surprisingly, they actually kept the MSRP despite doubling the base storage. Apple iPad 10 Wiki... iPad 10th generation. So the iPad 10th generation was actually announced in October 2022. So we are looking at a more than 2-year gap here.
awkward to handle. But the point is, this camera ain't one of them. You know what they need to do next? They need to give this telephoto camera a really short minimum focusing distance so that it could also become your macro camera.
Yeah, they just need to magically change all optics. We've already seen how some of the optics tricks that they've been advertised over the years, like variable aperture, going away.
Dude, that would be next level. But yeah, that's the key cool thing about Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And then there's just little AI tidbits like AI Expand that I would say works
I hate that.
just as well as Samsung's generative image editor, which is a compliment, plus AI Sky, which I always thought was a cool feature, and now, I guess, thanks to more intelligent processing, it's also a pretty powerful feature.
Jesus, like, I hate the fact that he has zero respect for, like, actual photography. Like, I hate that shit so much. They're like free web tools that put in a different sky into your images. Like Photoshop does all of this shit so much better and so like for so little money. like the fact that he like praises it just because it's in the Photos app, that really pisses me off, because it just guarantees that all the shit I see online will just become more and more fake.
You can totally see how if you were listing your house for sale and you wanted a sunny shot to sell it, then this is a way more reliable way of guaranteeing it as opposed to waiting for one. So now it's time to step up. What do you do when even that camera isn't enough? Well, this
Also,
is...
by the way, if you're selling your house, especially if you're selling it through like a company or something like that, they will send somebody with an actual like professional camera.
the Xiaomi concept camera system. There's only 10 to 20 of them in the world, and Xiaomi has specifically designed them to prove a single point. So you get the phone, and then you get this lens. So let's be very clear about something for a minute. The idea of adding a professional lens to your phone is not a new one. I mean, you've been able to buy phone camera lenses on Amazon for like 15 years now. Not to mention, even Xiaomi themselves have tried to properly integrate a lens system onto one of their previous concept phones. But
This is what I'm saying. Like previous concept phones, previous hardware that didn't pan out. Like there's a lot of excitement for stuff that often doesn't play. I'm sorry, guys, that's the Coke. That doesn't pan out quite the way some people expect it to.
This is the first time
and they
that
end
I've
up
ever seen the
hyping it
camera
up, and then it
attached
doesn't
onto
happen.
the middle of the phone. There's a reason. So the issue with what's been done for years now is that it doesn't really matter how great the lens that you make is. If you're putting that lens on top of a phone-sized camera sensor, there's a limit to how good it's going to be.
You're also putting it on top over an other lens. Those YouTubers are always trying to justify. The fact is, I can understand excitement. I can even understand overhyping some stuff. I don't have a problem saying this camera system is really good. What I do dislike is this idea, oh, the 4x telephoto has become my main camera, right? I'm like, bro, especially like even Xiaomi wouldn't advertise it like that. They would say, oh, we have like this amazing 1-inch sensor. Just put the camera freaking closer to yourself and get much better image quality. Like even like the aperture, like f1.6 versus like f2.6, the sensor size difference, the fact that it's a Sony sensor, which are usually better than the Samsung sensor on the telephoto. But yeah, I mean, hype is something that like, I guess it just comes easy for other brands that you don't ever actually use for yourself. Really, every time I see these AI features, I lose a few brain cells, as do I, believe me. Because to me, like, what Apple has focused on when it comes to AI, and this is not an excuse, there's some shit that I want Apple to improve, but like writing tools. I mean, sure, I could argue you should know some basic grammar yourself, but it's not bad to have an editor in that regard. Cleanup for small shit in the background, right? I mean, it's not bad to have a cleanup tool that can erase you yourself from a main selfie. But I would argue, why did you ever take an image like that if you want to delete it? Like, would I delete my ex from all my prior images with cleanup or whatever like that? No, of course I wouldn't. That's psychotic. So like I just wonder where like this love for these AI features comes from. It's like this one feature that he just showed. Like AI Sky, okay, so he brought up one specific example for like, if you don't want an overcast sky over your home, okay, whatever. But like this feature, AI Expand, like what was gained in this image by having this artificial part of a brown background making up a bigger part of the image? What was gained here?
But this is the first time that I've ever seen the camera attach onto the middle of the phone. There's a reason. So the issue with what's been done for years now is that it doesn't really matter how great the lens to have. It's decided is, if you actually wanted to avoid all bottlenecks, if you actually wanted to make a phone capable of big camera photography, then you really need to create both an external lens and an external sensor. So this might look like it's just a lens, but this is actually a...
Yeah, I mean, you could in theory have like only a sensor in your phone. With like one lens above it, and then like on top of that you stack like a lens system like this. because in theory, like the thickness of the sensor itself is pretty thin, so it's not going to be constrained by your smartphone. But in that case, that sensor will be basically completely useless because you need like 5 lenses on top of that sensor to even give you a nice image. 6 are better, 7 are way better, right? So yeah, you probably want it all in one external package. Replace your ex in all pictures with current girlfriend feature when, yeah, that might be like, yeah, I'll give you that one. That probably. Could you imagine if it also like mixed their faces? If it didn't like flat out replace them, but it did like that face merger thing that you do in like Snapchat and shit like that. It seems half the features are to gaslight ourselves in life instead of useful features. I agree.
A full system designed in-house by Xiaomi that contains both. Think of this like an entire camera, just without a screen.
Yeah,
And you might have
I
these
used once to help make a photo pretty to use as a wallpaper. Yeah, but like using something as a wallpaper, right? It's not really, you know what I mean? It's not really useful at that point. You're not really doing anything here that like is actually transformative of like, oh, this is the best memory of this photo that I can take. Yeah, like I mean, Apple's like doesn't stretch it, but they zoom in a lot in it, and it's not like I'm saying any kind of expand feature is useless at all. But whenever I find it problematic when it's like advertised as like making a smartphone camera better, right? That's what I've seen like Mr. Boss do, like by including AI is like a fully separate part of his camera reviews. That's where I'm get really annoyed. I think if somebody else was just mentioning this, it's like, oh, it's a feature that's built in. It's not bad, right? But whenever like Aaron does it, I'm like, oh, I can already smell like him including it in like the next like Xiaomi versus Apple, Samsung versus Apple video or whatever.
same initial reaction that I had to this, which is, why would you do that? Look at this phone. It already has its own full set of internal...
Yeah, but this is a prototype. I think the reason they put the cameras on here is also for some kind of comparison. I think they deliberately, the cameras in here will not be as good. And when you actually think about it, that like gigantic circle of cameras from the Ultra wouldn't even fit here.
cameras here. Why on earth would you ignore all of that and stick this entirely separate new camera on top? At that point, like, what is this?
I mean, variable aperture, variable zoom, larger sensor, all of that. AI Expand is useful for those trash pictures my coworkers send me for graphic work. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take you
this is where the
at your
magic
word
happens.
for it.
So the lens snaps onto place on the back of the phone with some very strong magnets. But this isn't just to like hold it in place so that you can pair the two via Bluetooth. There's actually 2 very tiny little pins on this to create...
So this is the one thing that obviously, like, to all the Apple only people here, of course, who only know about Apple stuff, think about it like the pogo pins on the the Magic Keyboard, right? And the way they attach to your iPad, that way your iPad can even charge through your Magic Keyboard through the extra USB-C port. The iPad itself, of course, transfers power to your keyboard for stuff like backlit keys. And of course, it transfers data back and forth between your devices. So that's what this is here for. I need that on PC. Yeah, this is, by the way, one thing that I've seen people not pay enough attention to. AI on Windows, when it comes to built-in stuff, is just flat out garbage. Even though Microsoft was first to like partner with OpenAI and ChatGPT, and they have their own large language models. But like slowly they've just given up on making AI something system-wide, and they're now integrating it in stuff like Office 365. But like the integrated Photos app in Windows 11 doesn't do any of the cool stuff that you get from smartphones and things like that. So, and a lot of the stuff doesn't run on device. So you don't really, at that point, why even bother with it? So they try to do a lot more with stuff like Copilot and that that backup feature where it saves everything you do as screenshots. And it just was such an utter mess, such a privacy nightmare, that now Microsoft, who was arguably the first company to really leverage AI in a big way, at least publicly, right? Like, obviously they had to rely on OpenAI, but they were the first big tech company to do so. But now they're lagging behind everyone else. Benveni, I like the way Pixel Advisor is features for them. They're could be useful. Yeah, I do agree, by the way. I think that not only does Google advertise their features better when it comes to AI, but I also think that the features they make are better. Like that photo, face where it takes a lot of images, right? And then you can choose the face that is right for you, right? Maybe one that's more in focus, maybe one where you were smiling better, right? And then for 3 or 4 people, you can combine the faces. Yes, it's not very natural, it's not very accurate to real life, but in my opinion, it can genuinely be useful, especially on a smartphone, right? Your hands might be shaking, the light might have been too bad for a smartphone. It's not a feature I would really want on a professional camera, but on a smartphone, I fully understand its value. Now, over time, I think Samsung just copied that feature. I hope... I'm sorry. I hope Apple copies it too, but I have way more respect for Google in the way, even though Google has done a lot of bad AI stuff too, but to me, like, I have found Google to be much more in touch with what consumers actually need, and maybe that's the benefit of them building their own hardware. Maybe they just have data that Microsoft doesn't see. Like, I found that everything that Google has done thus far much more interesting than what Microsoft has been doing. Windows is just bloatware at this point.
Instant hardware connect.
It's like Windows 11 started out so nice. It had like a cohesive design. It wasn't perfect by any means. It still had like decades old icons and shit like that. Some stuff was like not redesigned at all, even a year or two later. But I could see a progression. But now it just feels abandoned. Like, it feels like Microsoft just like said to all developers inside Microsoft, like, work on AI, guys.
This is actually a brand new piece of tech that Xiaomi is calling LaserLink. They've developed it specifically for this phone.
So it's definitely not a brand new piece of technology, but it's a new piece of technology for in this specific context.
Yeah, is that thanks to these pins and a couple of extra bits of engineering on the inside, you get 2 major perks. A, that you can now power this camera entirely just using the phone's internal battery.
Which would be still possible with like an NFC device that like pairs to something like MagSafe with like reverse wireless charging. But yeah, those pogo pins will be way, way more energy efficient than making all of this a wireless charger.
Which immediately means that you don't now have a whole extra gadget that you have to persistently worry about keeping charged. And B, that you get nanosecond level data transfer.
Yeah, that's the main benefit, because otherwise you might as well just use a second digital camera, because this way the processing can actually happen on your smartphone. If you didn't have this kind of instant communication, which Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, none of it would be even remotely fast enough for the fast data transfers that you would need, especially for video capture, but even for like the multi-photo capture that you now need for the more complicated modern image pipelines. Yeah, so yeah, they had to do this. It's not like it was optional for them to just make it like a wireless charging external camera.
Between this camera and the image signal processor in the phone, which means they can basically communicate in real time, which means this phone can treat this camera as if it were baked inside of it. And that is a big deal. It means that literally the exact split second that you snap this
thing
on...
So you can already see, by the way, that quality level here is surprisingly weird. It's either, like, I mean, the ultra-wide is enabled here, but it's not even like the widest ultra-wide that I have seen. So I think they deliberately put in somewhat bad cameras in this prototype device to make this camera look even better.
You'll see this icon pop up in your camera app that you can use to switch to this lens, which is not normal. Every concept phone that I've used up until this point has had potential, some sort of cool feature that works, but with just about everything else surrounding it being really clunky. And so it's quite surprising just how refined of an experience
I mean, it's a prototype device that does one thing different from a regular smartphone. Like it better do this right. Why else send it to you? Like the bigotry of low expectation here is really weird to me, where people are like, oh, the prototype wasn't broken.
this feels. And just think about what it means. It means that all of a sudden you are shooting using this. You're getting all the benefits of high-end optics. So this is a 100 megapixel, 35mm f1.4 lens with a 4.
So you can already see. So I'm not actually sure if you only adjust then its aperture, or you can also zoom in a little bit, like actually hardware lens wise. If you don't, then it's worthless. At that point, you should just, like, the space and money investment in it, and the fact that it compromises the cameras you can actually put inside your phone, because this eats up a certain amount of space. Yeah, so it's also not the largest sensor. 4x3, I mean, that it is large, don't get me wrong, but I would have wished to have like a 1.5 by 1 inch sensor at the very least.
Third sensor, so
I would have preferred 2 inches, to be quite honest, because that could fit inside here.
That's basically extreme resolution with a sensor that is twice the size of the biggest sensors on any smartphone to take advantage.
I mean, 1/3 on each axis. It's not quite 2x, but okay.
Of that resolution, and with a pro-level lens that's built similarly to the way a smartphone's lens is built, just with enough space to actually execute it properly. And you can have that all with the intelligent AI software processing.
Why? Why AI? We have had good smartphone cameras way before AI. Just say smartphone processing, say machine learning, say image algorithms, say something other than AI. He clearly, like, this is, by the way, clear criticism for me now. I think he is repeating these words like AI and mentioning all of these specific features. I'm not saying that like his excitement for like the 4x telephoto on the Ultra is fake, right? I'm not saying that. But I am saying the fact that he's clearly trying to like appease these companies by saying, oh guys, I actually like your AI stuff and your AI algorithms and your AI cameras and your iPhoto processing tools. I think he's trying to keep his relationship to those companies, so they keep sending him prototypes like this. And this also begs another question, where we often hear criticism about like Apple chosen press and Apple chosen media, right? And you can argue that maybe Apple should reach out to more people, but you have something so exclusive. As he mentioned, literally somebody flew personally from China to bring it to him. This wasn't put into even like a more, or like a secure, like guaranteed delivery box from China. You know the amount of money that Xiaomi was putting here to reach him personally, and I guarantee you part of that is his very, very positive reception to stuff like AI and shit like that.
That's been being optimized on smartphones for like the last 15 years plus. It means that you get smartphone features, like I can still use things like live motion photos, like AI face beautification, or even portrait mode if I wanted to add even more background blur, none of which you would get on a normal DSLR camera. You never need to charge this camera. There's no separate SD cards or like separate apps that you need to install to manage the footage that comes from it. Everything that you take on it will just save directly into your phone's gallery for sharing or editing. The thing even has a precision motor inside of it for autofocus. But
I mean, it better. What, like, you cannot have this without autofocus. What are you talking about?
It just feels so crazy to be able to manually be adjusting the focus on my lens here, feeling the subtle vibrations from the action created by the vibration motors inside the phone, and then just the second I decide I'm done, snapping it off as if it was just a mini power bank or something. I took this thing out for a day trip yesterday, and it does give the exact feeling of having a premium compact camera. You might have seen ones like the Fuji X100s that have been picking up in popularity. Using this is very close to the feel of using something like that.
But with unfortunately a worse sensor and not as varied of an optical system.
So while it is way more clunky than just taking shots on your phone's internal cameras, it's way less clunky than carrying around a whole extra external camera and all of the extra
this was a nice image. This is a bad image. Like, I have no idea why he showed an image where his face was, and this is Xiaomi to a T. Like, all his facial features, any kind of definition to like him potentially having like, you know, a forehead that might actually have like some 3D structures. It's just completely gone. It just makes him look like a freaking doll.
With that. And the difference between this and a phone camera is
And by the way, this image to me looks better on the Samsung. Like he's really like jerking off to like the bokeh depth of field, but I find the colors on the Samsung much better here. And I mean, yeah, like, but at least I can see what's in the background.
absolutely indisputable. Like, if
And there will be one shot here where I entirely disagree with his
my
assessment.
grandparents would have no issue
So
being able
this is where I clearly agree with him. This looks way better.
to see it, especially as it becomes even more pronounced at night. Okay, two caveats that I did pick up on are, one, the battery is not great on this, and that's because this concept is based on a Xiaomi 15, but to fit the power delivery mechanism required to get power from the phone's internal battery to this camera, they've actually had to shrink the size of the battery that the phone would normally
Yeah, but that's okay for a prototype. In
come
my
with,
opinion.
which is
You
acceptable.
also could theoretically put in a little bit more battery in here. Like, I mean, you could literally make it like 10% thicker, fit in a very small like battery in between, right? Like maybe 400 or 500 milliampere hours, and then stack the actual camera system on top of that.
For a concept, but should Xiaomi ever come to releasing a final product like this, it's an issue they'd need to figure out. And then two is just the fact that this isn't like the best lens ever. As of right now, this doesn't quite match the image quality.
So 0.3 millimeters, so 1 by 1.3. Okay, so they do not talk about
you could get
variable
from
zoom.
something like the Fuji. But to their credit, solvable issue. I imagine that they've rattled this together quite quickly just to demo the point of what it does.
Yes, and that's the problem of prototypes. They get you excited. They themselves are not as fully featured as they might be, and they already compromise on things that in the real world you probably wouldn't want to accept. And now, once you consider, once they actually solve for all the issues, like a potentially even larger sensor, actually changeable optical zoom, not just focus and aperture and stuff like that, well, now you will end up with a system that is actually even more complicated to integrate in a real-world product.
But now that this whole laser link system is built and it works, then I can't see a reason why they couldn't just work with a company like Leica and co-build an entire system of really top-end lenses that have built-in sensors and
MagSafe camera when? Yeah, the issue is he is correct though. Like this would need like a real hardware connection. So just attaching it to MagSafe would not work, unfortunately. Like it could work. I mean, you could attach almost like its own separate camera, but then it would need its own processor too. Right? Which I guess for Apple wouldn't even be that crazy. Like they could just like take off the image signal processor and then throw in from the A series chip, or they could use an A series chip that is so binned down that only the ISP is left. But at that point, it does become more expensive. It does become more, just more hardware that you need to put in, making it more complicated and stuff like that. So, unfortunately, not MagSafe cameras soon.
you could have completely different types of accessories. Like, there's no reason you couldn't have an 8 terabyte storage drive that would snap onto the back and be able to instantly read.
That actually could work with MagSafe too. I mean, technically it would be like a wireless connection, but it would be like a Wi-Fi connection that it's like fully stabilized over NFC. So in that regard, that could work for Apple.
And write just like internal storage because of the physical connection from the pins. Does this have mainstream potential? Maybe. I'm not.
It depends. Like if this happens, I would want whatever smartphone comes out with this to only have one sensor, right? A decent sensor like 25 millimeter, 48, 50 megapixel, 1 by 1.56 inches, f1.4, f1.6 aperture, right? So basically, I would want the regular smartphone to have as much of internal space as it can for larger batteries, because as he said, some of the power mechanism here would eat up internal space. I don't want my speakers compromised. I don't want my antenna compromised, my microphones, my haptics, my thermal solution. That's also a big problem here, potentially, right? Not only does it take away space that could potentially be used for like vapor chambers, unless you make the phone really thick, but now it also creates extra heat that the system needs to deal with. And you now need more power rails so you can actually like, lead the power to where it needs to be. So yeah, it could work down the road, but it would really need to come with an almost like paradigm shift in the way we use smartphones.
Yeah, convinced.
Like an iPhone Air could honestly work pretty well for something like this, right? Only one camera. It's already not the greatest phone when it comes to cooling or battery size. So especially if you also give this one like a little bit of its own battery, like 500-600 milliamp hours, it could really work.
But, I mean, at the very least, this is as convinced as I ever have been by a concept phone.
And just to really drill home what it's like to shoot on it, let's say...
Yeah, so by the way, look at how bad he looks here. Right? Like, yeah, the iPhone is overly warm. We've been there, we've done that. Look at the lack of definition in his hair. Like sure, you get the nicer, deeper bokeh, but like the iPhone looks better here across the board.
I was filming a sponsor.
Like his skin, like again, the iPhone makes him look a little bit too warm. Okay, this looks just bad, and the iPhone keeps the focus way better on his face.
Section for Surfshark VPN using.
So just in this case, you can see just how much sharper he is on iPhone. So this is where I'm just legit confused. If like maybe they used like an old ISP but they said this device is based on the Xiaomi 15, so I assume it's using D8 Elite or whatever sensor they're using here. It might just be not a very good sensor. Plus, this is a 35mm lens, so the iPhone might just be better with its native 24mm and just like for this kind of focal distance. But yeah, I'm just surprised that he chose this as an example to make the iPhone look worse when the iPhone clearly looks better.
This phone versus the very best iPhone. I tell you that people don't even realize that Netflix is not the same.
Yeah, so... And you can see, by the way, the bokeh is not really deep enough with this kind of sensor. It looks almost hazy. And then there's like this grayish look that's on top of his face where the iPhone just clearly shows this is him, this is the background. Yeah, the background is not as bokeh, but it's not bad. I am like... This is why I'm like, you chose this to make the iPhone look bad? You have zero definition on your face, bro, here. That's Xiaomi processing for you.
Across countries, that Japan gets more anime.
Yeah, but this is where we basically finish for today. Tomorrow, we are probably going to be back at a similar time to cover the release of the M4 MacBook Air. So let's see if there's anything else right now. No. Not on Mac Rumors, not on Apple's newsroom page. And let's look at 95Mac. Yeah, so we are expecting the M4 MacBook Air tomorrow. Let's hope it actually pans out that way. Thank you guys so much for joining today. Thank you so much for the lively comment section. We're going to look tomorrow what Apple does with the pricing of the MacBook lineup, with the binning of the M4 chip, whether or not they keep the M3 MacBook Air in the lineup or the M2. So plenty of interesting stuff to analyze. As always, let me know what else you would like to see me look at. Again, stuff like this is always interesting because it gives me opportunities to learn. It gives me also opportunities to criticize and learn what not to do sometimes, but it's not a bad video. Yeah, so I always appreciate your input. Before you leave me, do all the YouTube jazz, super chatting. Super chatting, maybe. You can leave that for tomorrow's video. But you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. And please leave a comment afterwards. Not just in the live chat, but also afterwards. That helps tremendously with the algorithm. And you can consider becoming a YouTube supporter here or a supporter over on Patreon. However you choose to engage with me, with the community, it's all very much appreciated. Also, if you find any more details about that M4 Max die situation, I would be very grateful for that. But that's about it for today. Thank you again so much for joining. I'll see you guys very hopefully tomorrow with very clear big news. And I'll see you then. This is Mark Tech tuning out.